Hi there everybody, my name is Mike Montgomery from Modern Builds, and today I'd like to welcome you to the very first welding project video on Modern Builds. It's a simple modern fire pit and all you need is an angle grinder and a welder. Now let's get started. Woo. This video is brought to you by the Wrangler Rigs line of workwear. I've been wearing my Wrangler rigs for the past couple of weeks now, and I've got to say, out here in this Oklahoma heat, combined from the heat from welding and this fire, the Cool Vantage technology that's built into the denim is great, not to mention all of the cool features that I'll be showing off throughout the video. But for now, let's get this project started.
The first thing I needed to do was unload this big sheet of steel out of the bed of my truck. This is what all of the pieces for the main body of the fire pit are going to be cut out of.
So this is a 4-foot by 10-foot sheet of 12-gauge hot rolled steel. Now if you don't do welding, this is probably a lot of terms that you don't understand and a lot of terms I didn't understand until yesterday when I went to my metal supplier to pick all of this up. Like I mentioned, this is only the second welding project I've ever done, so all of this metal terminology is still really new to me. The gauge of the metal refers to the thickness. This is 12 gauge, which means it's somewhere around a 1/16 of an inch thick, which should be great for this project. And when you buy metal, you can either get hot rolled or cold rolled. Hot rolled means it's flattened out and shaped under heat, while cold rolled means it's flattened out or shaped under pressure, I think. Cold rolled is a little more rigid, a little less malleable, but for this project, hot rolled is fine, plus it's a little bit cheaper. A standard sheet of steel like this is 4 foot by 10 foot, unlike plywood, which is 4 foot by 8 foot. So I should have more than enough to build the whole project out of one sheet, so enough talking, let's get building.
The basic geometry of this pyramid is what's called an inverted truncated square pyramid. I think. I had to Google it to know what that meant. But essentially it's just an upside down pyramid that starts at 10 inches at the base and tapers up to 30 inches at the top. So here I'm cutting out the sides, which are trapezoids that taper those same measurements. Now I'll have information on my website with diagrams, cut lists, everything you'll need to be able to build this project. So make sure and check that out if you're planning on building this. I attached a cutoff wheel to my angle grinder and started cutting along all of my Sharpie lines. Now obviously I wasn't able to get perfectly straight cuts, but perfect isn't what we're going for on this project. That's one of the really awesome things that I found about welding is your joints don't have to be absolutely perfect. So long as they're meeting and touching, everything should be okay. Once I had my 4 sides cut, I moved to the corner of the sheet metal and cut out a 10-inch by 10-inch square. I checked and made sure that that factory corner was perfectly square, so it gave me a good reference to start.
It's a swell gag.
Now when it comes to choosing which welder you want to use, there's a ton of options and a lot of reasons why you would pick one over another. Now I'm not recommending this machine specifically for you watching, but I'll tell you why I'm using this machine. It uses 110 volts instead of 220, which is great for my shop and, well, my videos, because I know a lot of you guys don't have that kind of power in your shop. The other reason is because it uses a flux core wire. Unlike a MIG rig, I don't need to use any argon gas or anything like that. It's a really simple self-contained unit. With pretty much any decent welder, you'll have a cheat sheet on the inside panel here that'll tell you the feed rate and the power requirements based on the thickness of the metal you're using, so reference that in your welder. And I guess I should say this video isn't sponsored by Lincoln Electric. I'm actually borrowing this machine from a friend who was nice enough to lend it to me. Now let's get started.
So I wanted to raise all of my sides up, not all the way up to where they would be, but a little bit. That way I could tack weld them all together. So I just used some scrap 2x4s to raise them up a bit so I could weld them.
Oh, and really quickly, I want to mention, anytime you're welding, you should be wearing long sleeves at least, if not a welding jacket, something I didn't realize the first day I was welding. Obviously, it can protect against any molten metal flying around, but it also protects against what's equivalent to a sunburn that you can get from a welder. The arc is super bright and can actually give you basically a sunburn, which is what I got a little bit of. So if you want to avoid a farmer tan, and if you want to get a little bit safer, make sure and get a welding jacket.
So as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to raise up my sides, that way I wasn't welding them all flat. That way, when I bent them into place, they wouldn't have to bend as far. I'm sure there's an overly complicated jig that could have gotten me the exact angle all of the sides needed to be, that way I wouldn't have to kind of rig this up, but it worked out fine and saved me a lot of time. Then once I had all my tack welds in, I could come back and run actual beads. That way everything would be super, super strong. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this is only my second time welding and I know my beads aren't perfect. So if you're a welder and you have any tips that you think might help, I'd love to hear. Leave me a comment down below. So at this point in the project, the main body of the fire pit is complete and I need to make a little platform for it to sit on. So I got a 1-inch piece by 3/16-inch piece of steel and I'm cutting 4 8-inch pieces out of it. I'll weld these to the bottom of the fire pit and this will give it a platform to raise it off the ground. That way it has room to drain, it can get air, and it'll just look a little bit nicer. And with all of my welds complete, I could go back to my angle grinder, put on a grinding wheel, and smooth out all of those ugly welds.
The next day.
So the grinding disc did most of the work of cleaning up all of my joints, but here I'm installing a flap disc on my angle grinder to smooth everything else out. This is just going to make everything super smooth to the touch and make sure that all of those little pieces of flux are off. The last thing I needed to weld up was a grate to make sure that the fire wasn't sitting at the bottom of the fire pit. That way it could have good airflow as well as just look nicer. I just cut 8 16-inch long pieces of the same steel I used for the base and tack welded it all together to make a nice grate. The spacing is probably a little wider than what's ideal, but it worked out great. You'll see on later in the video. Here I'm drilling some holes that will help water drain for when it rains, as well as attaching it to this concrete pad. I just drilled a corresponding hole into my 16 by 16-inch paver that I got from Home Depot, ran a bolt through that, then just tightened down a nut and a washer on top. This counterweights the fire pit so that it can't rock over, plus I think it looks nicer being on a pad than just on the grass. So overall, I think the fire pit came out really awesome, especially for my first welding project video yet. None of the angles were super complicated, and like I said, if you want to build this project, check out my website tutorial. I'll have dimensions and plans and all of that. That way you can build it yourself too.
So I hope you all enjoyed this project. I know I had a ton of fun making it. Welding was something I've been wanting to get into for a long time now, and even though I messed with it a couple months ago, this was the first completed project for Modern Builds I was able to make a video for. Now I know my welds weren't perfect and they definitely weren't pretty, but they're strong, they're holding together, and I learned a lot in the process. Now obviously I learned I should have worn a welding jacket so I didn't get this little bit of farmer's tan I got going, but I also learned a lot about how to get a little bit more of a consistent weld, which is something I still need to work on. There's quite a bit that goes into adjusting the wire speed and the power of the machine, but it's something that I'm getting better at. I want to thank Wrangler Rigs one more time for sponsoring this video. If you're at all interested in checking out the Rigs line of workwear by Wrangler, make sure and check out that link in the description. The Cool Vantage Denim and the jeans were great in the heat, not to mention all the heat that the welder puts off, and I really love these heavy-duty work shirts that Rigs makes. You're going to see me in these a lot. If you have any questions or comments about this project, I'd love to hear your feedback. Be sure to leave me a comment, or you can hit me up on Instagram. If you're new to my channel, I'd like to say welcome, as well as please consider subscribing. That way you can stay updated every time I post a project video, which is every week. Thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you next time on Modern Builds.